From time to time, I know I enjoy a good philosophical debate. And I think that's necessary when you talk about manhood because in our culture, I think what has been lost is the ability to sit down and rationally speak about a subject, even though the two individuals involved in the conversation may have drastically different viewpoints. It's still an art, I believe, to be able to sit down and talk to an individual across from you that differs from you in thought process and pattern, but to still be able to do it peacefully and to try to come to some accord. And so the next video that we'll be looking at is just that. It's a debate about discrimination. And as the video goes along, the individuals that are involved in this particular debate will identify themselves. And they will, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, give you their credentials as to how it is that they can speak on the subject with authority. So let's get into the video and find out what we can learn about discrimination.
I would like to add someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, a Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. And I guess I do, have a copy of the book that he recently wrote with his son. It's the one you may have read about in Time magazine called Right and Wrong. It's a dialogue between father and son. His son is here and will be out later. He's a lawyer. And Mr. Weiss is, did I mention this? Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. You've seen him on the show possibly before. He's the most interesting teacher I had at Yale because he was, he didn't lecture. The class was fluid. He answers questions as they're fired at him. And I'd like him to meet you, if you haven't met him yet, and to meet Mr. Baldwin and Phyllis Newman. And here's Dr. Paul Weiss. Were you able to listen to the show backstage?
A good deal of it, but then I was behind the rostrum here.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with?
I disagreed with a great deal of it. Mm-hmm. I am one of Mr. Baldwin's admirers. I've written him 10 letters, and of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability, and the problem is to become a man. For each one of us, I think all this talk about poverty, race, prejudice is important, vital, but it's not really at the center. It deals only with the means in the way, or the obstacles in the way of becoming something much more serious and important. That is, to be someone in yourself. To become a man is a difficult job. It takes a lifetime.
I don't disagree with that at all.
I didn't think you would.
But
we see that Mr. Weiss has established the first premise of this debate. He's saying that the main goal is to become a full man. That's the main goal. And in terms of what he means to become a full man, that's developing within oneself the qualities that will allow a person to become productive, the qualities that will allow an individual to have self-respect and self-esteem. Mr. Weiss is saying that these are the things that need to be sought after. These are the things that we should be working toward, and the obstacles around becoming a man should not be focused on. Yes, they're vital. Yes, they're important, but the central focus should be shifted to becoming a man. And by him saying that, what he's doing is he's pulling manhood out to the fore and saying that regardless of color, ethnicity, nationality, whatever, he's pulling manhood out and saying that this should be the goal of every male, to become a full-grown man and to be an individual that's respected, an individual that has respect within himself and for those around him. Let's keep going.
I take that for granted. I really do.
That, you see, but by taking it for granted, you emphasize always the obstacles in the way, and perhaps you have it in mind, but I think your hearers very often forget that you have another objective in view. the one we both agree upon.
Is what I'm talking
And I
about.
thought Dick was asking that question before when he asked you, aren't you being more extreme? Isn't there some other end? Is it all hopeless? In one sense, it is not hopeless. In another sense, it is. It's hopeless in the sense that nobody ever attained the state of being a full man. But it's not hopeless in the sense that every one of us has a problem which he can resolve more or less within himself. These obstacles are terrible, I agree with you, but they're not insuperable if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, but what I was discussing was not that problem.
Okay. Now, Dr. Weiss has further expounded upon his argument. And I must say that that is a logical progression that he's using. And I think that so far the conversation has been very beneficial. But now one point that I want to pull out is that he made the statement that no individual attains to the status of becoming a full man. And I agree with that because on every level, we make mistakes as men. And for the most part, because we make those mistakes, we never attain to the full measure of manhood. But then again, we continue to struggle. We continue to progress. We continue to try to move forward because we want to present the best that we possibly can to the world. Because in doing so, we leave an example for those that come after us. And so this debate about discrimination is not just about the current state of things, but it's about going into the future. It's about individuals that come after us. It's about attaining an understanding of each other that will benefit the next generation. And so this whole thought of moving forward with manhood, attaining to being the full status or full stature of a man is important. Because the more we focus on becoming men, the more we focus on positive masculinity, then the better the individuals around us will fare. In each and every aspect of life, those around us will see good for the hard work that we've done. But let's get back to discrimination. Let's continue with the thoughts of Mr. Baldwin next.
Really, I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by the society when a black man attempts to become a man.
Yes, but there's another important connect with that, and I suppose you do agree. All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'm not talking about that. I understand
I know
that.
you're not.
I understand that. But as we sit here now, by the will of the people, a man named Ronald Reagan governs California. And the terms I'm using, you must understand, are not the terms that I myself might choose. I'm not interested in whether a person is white or black or green or yellow, but I'm talking about the force of the state which at this moment is oppressing black people all over this nation.
Not all.
The force of the state which is oppressing every black man in this nation.
You write freely, don't you not? Is black getting in your way as being a writer, an author?
Yes.
It is. Tell us how. I'd like to know how being black gets in the way of your being an author.
In the first place, now you put me a little bit on the spot.
I wanted
I don't
to.
like to discuss myself or my
All
work.
right, let's not talk about you. Let's talk about some other black author or white author.
No, let's not do it that way. I'll tell you what I mean. I'll use myself. Let's go for broke. It is the first difficulty then is to, and you will say this is true for everybody, but I am like you, all right? In the first place, I have to deal with the fact that my history is inaccessible to me. That my history in this country begins with the bill of sale.
Your individual history?
My name is Baldwin.
Yes.
It's an old
I
English
understand
name.
that. My name is Weiss, and it's been derived from somebody else. Maybe my great ancestor was white-haired or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, but you have at least the Psalms of David.
I don't have them. I don't think I've read them in 10 years.
That doesn't matter.
Or 20. I couldn't tell you one of them.
That doesn't matter.
Doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. One's got to face this fact. Let us say we're both black, right? We both get here at the same time, right? You come from one tribe, I come from another. You speak one language, I speak another. We cannot talk to each other. We don't know what is happening to us. We're confronting a white man with a Bible and a gun and a cross. And what you have to do, if you're going to live, is accept this stranger, this book you cannot yet read, under the gun. Wait a moment. You asked me a question, I'll do my best to answer it.
Yes, but you must give me a chance to say something,
Yeah,
too.
but one moment,
All right.
one moment. I will, I really will. I'm not trying to.
Can I do something even more unforgivable because due to the mechanics, if we don't pause now, we may not be back for a while. So we will, and then we'll be back. Stay with us. Gentlemen, where were we?
So while they take their break, I wanted to interject for just a second and to maybe expound upon what Mr. Baldwin is trying to do. In Mr. Weiss's community, it may be okay to simply focus on becoming a full man, to focus on manhood. But in Mr. Baldwin's case, and in the case for our community, there are difficulties, there are obstacles that have to be hurdled. Discrimination is one, prejudice is another, but those difficulties have to be hurdled in order to obtain a certain mindset. That particular mindset allows you to move forward despite the hurdles, the obstacles, the problems that you have to deal with that may result from something that you had no control over. The color of your skin or any other thing that can be used to discriminate against a person. Usually that's a situation that you were born into. But regardless of what the reason for the discrimination is, an individual has to develop a mindset that will allow them to face that discrimination or that prejudice head on and not allow it to hinder them or allow it to impede their forward progress. And so I think that's what Mr. Baldwin is trying to help Mr. Weiss to appreciate. Yes, manhood is important. Yes, manhood should be the primary thrust of what we do as men. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are circumstances for certain groups that make manhood more difficult to achieve. Not impossible, but more difficult. So let's see what Mr. Baldwin says. Let's see if he can articulate this particular mindset that's necessary. Let's see.
I was in the middle of the Psalms of David.
Yes.
Right?
It's attributed to me somehow.
But I was trying to make a point. The point is this simply, that one began here with a history of an identity, not only inaccessible, but also systematically and deliberately denied and destroyed. The Moynihan Report talks about the breakup of the Negro family. And it occurs to me as a very bitter kind of comment on the people who did their best to break up that family. Now to blame the family for being broken up. And to suggest
He wasn't doing that, the report I read. Okay.
well, there are no male father images for the Negro child. Big news.
But he was trying
In
to
the first,
describe
in the first place, that's not as true as Moynihan would like to think. Otherwise, there would be none of us here at all. The point is that then, we'll come back to where I was. One has to really excavate out of the absence of a history, and then out of the presence of a history which is absolutely indescribable. You must remember that I was taught, and black children until today are being taught, that no black people ever contributed anything to history, that I was not much better than an ape, and I was lucky to be discovered in Africa by white people.
Mr. Baldwin, but if your case were carried out all the way through.
So now, I think that Mr. Baldwin just made a powerful point, and it speaks to his understanding of the premise that Dr. Weiss has just set up. Yes, becoming a full man is the primary focus. It's the goal in life as far as any man is concerned. To be an individual that's well respected, to have self-respect and self-esteem is what we all aspire to. Being able to stand on our own 2 feet, on the principles that we feel are important. But here is the caveat to that, and Mr. Baldwin is making this absolutely clear. That self-esteem, that self-respect usually springs from knowing who you are, where you come from. See, therein lies the difficulty for my community and for the community there that's being spoken about. Mr. Baldwin is saying that in his community, the knowledge of who we are, our history, our original languages, what tribes we come from, where in Africa we came from, who are our ancestors, those things have been disconnected. And so he's bringing to the fore that it's more of a challenge to establish what a man is, not necessarily moving toward manhood, but what is a man in the context of our community. Now, Mr. Weiss has he has plenty of examples, I should say, of what a man is and what a man should purport himself to be, because he can look back at his ancestors. He knows which language they spoke. He knows probably where they came from, where he is descended from. He knows those things because that history is available to him, but it is not with Mr. Baldwin. It is not with myself. So it's difficult to focus primarily on manhood because these kinds of issues overwhelm the issue of manhood. These kinds of issues, knowing where you came from, knowing your history, and knowing that those things were forcibly taken from you, can have an impact. We're not saying that achieving manhood is impossible, but this complicates the situation quite a bit. Let's keep going.
The way you're putting it, it'd be hard to understand how you ever wrote a word. After all, you're a distinguished novelist. You must have had time of freedom. Somebody must have paid attention to it. You must have been reviewed objectively as an author, not as a Negro. Nobody gave a damn whether your great ancestor had been bought or sold, but they treated your literature or your work in its own terms. That's where you wanted it. That's where you had it. That's where you're having it now. What are you criticizing? What are you objecting to? That there are terrible injustices, everyone admits. But you're generalizing and you're rigidifying, you're solidifying it in such a way as if there's no way out. You're an exhibition of the fact there's a way out.
Am I?
Yes. You yourself admitted.
So now, Dr. Weiss is most definitely a logical man. I can tell from his presentation and the way that the conversation is progressing. But do I feel that Dr. Weiss is looking at the sum total of the situation that Mr. Baldwin is presenting? I don't think so. I don't think so. I do agree with the fact that Mr. Baldwin is proof that if an individual has focused on becoming an asset to society, an asset to himself and those around him, he can most do that regardless of any of the obstacles and difficulties that may present themselves in his path. I do agree with that. But now, what is the reason why Mr. Baldwin was able to weather the storm? What are the reasons that he can produce that maybe other individuals were swept away instead of being able to make it through? Let's see what Mr. Baldwin said. What is his response to Dr. Weiss in this instance? Let's see.
You're not just the incarnation of blackness, you're an author. That's why I think of you.
I beg your pardon. I am also the oldest of 9 children, all of whom are black. I am one of the few survivors of my generation, all of whom the people I'm speaking of are black. Barry Jimmy Baldwin or Sammy Davis or Harry Belafonte or Sidney Poitier. There are a whole lot of people you've never heard of, at least equally talented, perhaps more talented, who do not manage. I'll tell you how one makes it in this country if you're black. You know, you have to decide somehow that you are not going to be controlled by what white people think of you.
Of course. Don't fool anybody.
So, as I mentioned, therein is the mindset. Therein is the thought process that separates him from those who he mentioned were never heard of. The thought process, being able to hurdle the obstacle of prejudice and discrimination, is simply not to be concerned with what's expected of you. And we don't mean that you proceed with reckless abandon. That's not what's being stated here. But as far as what scholarship is, as far as what being a man is, then see, individuals who don't have your experience, individuals who have not lived the life that you live, cannot and must not be able to set the standard for what manhood is. They cannot and they must not be able to legitimize their concerns and make them yours. That's something that cannot happen. So the boundaries that are set for an individual, those boundaries don't necessarily have to be adhered to. We can always move past those things, especially if they're limiting boundaries. And those boundaries have no lasting positive effect. They're just there because of an individual's color or something else that's involved that a person can't control. No, we can't submit ourselves to those kind of boundaries. Let's keep going.
When anybody thinks of you, ultimately you have to think of yourself and be true to yourself.
I don't care what Senator Eastland thinks about me.
Who cares?
Or Ronald Reagan thinks about me, but they have the power to destroy my life and the life of my children, and this is given them by the will of the state. I'm not talking about myself as a writer. Of course I'm a writer. I know that. I know what produced me, too. And it was not simply Charles Dickens or any of your colleges. It was also Bessie Smith and Ray Charles and my father, who was a preacher, and my mother, who learned how to sing.
That's cool with anybody who's a writer.
What I am trying to say is that the gap, the distance placed between myself and my own assessment, my own experience, was much greater than it would be for any white person in this country.
I don't believe it.
I know you don't believe it.
Wait a minute.
I'm not complaining. I'm not copying a plea. It's not a special plea. I'm trying to make you see something. Pretend that I'm an actor.
Every child starts from scratch. They are helped in various exterior ways in order to be able to find themselves. But the finding of themselves goes within. To become a writer is something that you have to struggle with by yourself, in yourself. And all these other things are conditions and problems, and I grant you had more than other people have.
I didn't even say that. I said they were different. I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than had already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You had to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody.
At any rate, everybody, no matter who, no matter what his attitude, is bigoted.
I did not say that.
Well, has an attitude. It's on his face. Is in the way of every boss.
But you're
every
asking
boss.
me. You're asking me to do something impossible. You're asking me to take the will for the deed. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians, and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
I never said that.
All right. Do you want to take 30 seconds to answer that?
Jonathan.
All right. We will be back after this message.
Okay, so that's the conclusion of the video. Now, what are my final thoughts? When we look at the way that Dr. Weiss developed his argument, he was absolutely logical to a fault. I appreciated his ideals and his thought process. Now, as far as becoming a man, I don't feel that there should be any obstacle that should prevent you from becoming what you are meant to be. You are born a male, but through time and diligence, you become a full man. Now, Dr. Weiss mentioned it's a goal that we can seek, even though we may never get there because of imperfection, because of making mistakes. But the attempt to become a full man, the attempt to become truly masculine, is something that all men should fight to accomplish. And so we have to fight the demons within ourselves, and we have to overcome the difficulties that present themselves around us. One of the difficulties that was discussed is discrimination. And so what Mr. Baldwin does is he accepts the premise that Dr. Weiss is setting forth, that the primary thrust should be to become a man. And Mr. Baldwin himself is proof that despite difficulties, despite challenges, you can become a productive member of society. But herein lies the difficulty. There are some very real challenges that face our particular community. Mr. Baldwin, he enumerated a few of those: the absence of our history, the absence of who we are, what language we spoke, what tribe we come from, where in Africa we descend from. All of those things have been disconnected from us. Mr. Baldwin said that his history began with a bill of sale. Imagine that, a bill of sale. And as he progressed in his thought process, he was saying that there are some very real dangers that exist when an individual in our community decides that they want to become a full man. There are limitations. And those limitations are placed there, and if an individual decides that they're going to overcome those limitations, it might cost them their life. So where did that come from? Where did that thought come from in regards to an individual losing their lives for speaking up about becoming a full man, achieving the status of manhood? Well, if you know Mr. Baldwin, you know that he was in a generation that brought forth Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And he had seen the assassination of both of those individuals. And so when he speaks about things as being a very real danger, we cannot underestimate that, because there were already actions that had been taken that facilitated the fact that this is a dangerous way to approach things. This is a way of approaching things that could primarily cost you your life and the life of those who love you. So that danger, he was not exaggerating. But then as he continues, he's saying that the only way that you can judge a tree, and when we say judge a tree, whether the tree is fruitful or whether the tree is barren, is by what it produces. If it never produces anything good, then the tree is barren. But if it bears fruit, then that means that the tree is fruitful, right? And so he goes on to list a number of things that he has seen from the institutions that are set up in this country, the school systems, for one, the education process that his kids had to go through, the books that they use, the difficulties that exist as proof that there is a problem. There has to be one. Otherwise, there wouldn't be discrimination as the result. There has to be an overwhelming problem that exists. Even though Mr. Weiss, or I should say Dr. Weiss, doesn't see it, there has to be a problem that exists, because there's continual areas where you can see discrimination being manifested. So if you don't have a problem with me as a person, then there won't be any residuals around you to show me that you have a problem. And let's say, for instance, let's take in real time, if there's an individual that has a dispute with another individual, and they seemingly resolve that dispute around each other, then there won't be individuals coming back to me as one of the individuals in the dispute. There won't be individuals coming back to me and saying, well, he said this about you. Or there won't be situations that are tense because we've already resolved the issue. there's no issue there. So there should be no resentment. There should be no negative feelings. There should be nothing that surrounds our interactions anymore that would show anybody that's involved or on the outside that there's a difficulty. And what Mr. Baldwin is saying is that's not the truth. At that time in his country, in the country of the United States, there was a difficulty because there were too many areas that you could point to where discrimination was being practiced and it was accepted. And so toward the end, Mr. Baldwin makes a powerful point. He points out that if these things exist, and if they are proof that there's a difficulty with African Americans in this country, then why is it that Dr. Weiss is espousing a notion that I should just believe that there is going to be somehow a peaceful resolution to this situation, that things are going to get better, that we're not going to have to deal with discrimination and prejudice when he's never seen that happen? It's hard to believe something that you've never seen happen. And so that's all he was saying. The thrust of his argument was not that he disagreed with Dr. Weiss about becoming a full man, because that's absolutely what the premise is. That's the goal toward which we reach as men, to be truly masculine in everything that we do. But for our community, it's especially noteworthy that there are some pronounced difficulties that are there. Pronounced difficulties that could result in an individual losing their lives just because of the color of a person's skin, just because of their ethnicity. And so even though becoming a man is primary, we have to focus on those difficulties that will prevent me from becoming a man because of cutting my lifespan short. This was a very powerful and enjoyable debate. And from time to time, I like to review these particular kinds of debates because it gives us an opportunity to discuss our ideas, and it gives us an opportunity to do so in a peaceful and a positive fashion. Well, as always, please like, comment, and subscribe, and be easy.